Welcome back to all of our viewers. Now, in our next section, a democratic Omni-American future. We'll get a closer look at the democratic ideals envisioned for society by Albert Murray. Greg, please lead the way.
Glad to. I want to bring together some of the threads that we've heard in the last 2 days, and particularly today, by focusing on an influence on Albert Murray and also on Ralph Ellison. The man's name is Kenneth Burke, and he is known for his work on rhetoric. He's focused on in the field of communications theory. And I'd like to share with you a book based on Kenneth Burke's work called Civic Jazz, American Music and Kenneth Burke on the Art of Getting Along. So let me just share some thoughts. According to Gregory Clark, the author of this book, Civic Jazz, sorry about that. He's a university professor of English at Brigham Young University. And he says that jazz is the quintessential democratic art, which creates human experiences of civic form in action. Form, according to Kenneth Burke, and this bears the influence of John Dewey's meditation on form in his book, Art and Experience. Form isn't just based on the artifact. An individual or audience of readers, listeners, and viewers co-create the form by their experience of the art and artifact. The experience of art is cultural and symbolic, with the potential to move us from one state of mind and consciousness and attitude to another as we engage in and with it. This is akin to the way we are carried along by the experience of a plot in the story, as Rabbi Buskila and Nick Janko were talking about, or by the syncopated rhythms of jazz. So this is a quote from Gregory Clark in Civic Jazz. In Kenneth Burke's concept, the rhetorical and the aesthetic, argument and art, necessarily combine. And in America, they combine in the project of shaping individuals in the image of interdependent independence that follows from the civic ideal of e pluribus unum. That so many Americans seem unwilling to claim that interdependence along with their independence, even to admit it, has always been this nation's basic civic problem. Now, Walt Whitman, the great poet, 19th century American poet, after the Civil War, he understandably, his faith in democracy after the Civil War was shaken. And Whitman, in what Greg Clark calls a long and moody essay, Democratic Vistas, looked beyond political democracy to what Whitman called a social or aesthetic democracy for a moral and artistic identity. Whitman's own poetry invited audiences into an experience of shared identity at Americans, but arguably only with the creation of jazz does one have the moral and aesthetic reenactment of American democratic principles and collective improvisation, where the individual is respected and acknowledged while the group strives for that ensemble mindset we call swing. Clark would agree with this, and he would extend the point even further, where he said, perhaps jazz is the music of democracy, not so much because it so well melds individual and group, freedom and order, though that is crucial, but because it does through joint acts of faith. Jazz musicians play the music upon the belief that something beyond themselves will be manifest there, something that expresses, in William James's phrase, quote, immense elation and surrender, as in the outlines of the outlines of confining selfhood, as the outlines of confining selfhood melt down. Now, if the call for joint acts of faith has a religious ring to it, that's okay. As Beth Eady demonstrates in her book, The Rights of Identity, The Religious Naturalism and Cultural Criticism of Kenneth Burke and Ralph Ellison. Both Burke and one of his most perceptive interpreters, Ellison, were concerned with, quote, religious traditions and experiences as naturally available to human beings without the attribution of any special supernatural powers to any human ideals, end quote. Burke and Ellison were like anthropologists of language, highlighting how the linguistic dimension is the site of contention over sacred meaning, with what Ellison called antagonistic cooperation, pointing to democratic differentiation and unity at the same time. John Dewey once wrote that the primary tenet of an authentic American civic religion was, quote, the continual disclosing of truth through directed cooperative endeavor, end quote. And riffing on Dewey, Clarke wrote, religion is about transcendence, and e pluribus unum is an aspiration as transcendent as any. Religion is also about sacrifice, and jazz music can show us the kind of cooperation that demands a profound sacrifice of self, the kind in which a better self can sometimes be discovered. And this is how jazz, Clarke writes, is intensely rhetorical in the very way religion is. Its project is to prompt others to progress beyond selfishness by enabling them to comprehend in themselves a person whom joining with others might let them become. And like religion, jazz draws upon the resources of rhetoric and aesthetics to let those who experience it experience that self rationally and emotionally, systematically and intuitively, all at once. So this is my intro to why jazz and democracy are so closely tied together, based on the work of Kenneth Burke, Ralph Ellison, and also our main focus, the person of Albert Murray.